So Riot Games have finally capitulated and opened up gambling as a revenue stream for teams in the MSI in across their range of games, including League of Legends, Valorant, and of course TFT. So this is a bit of an issue for me personally, being a League of Legends player since season one, although I'm a bit more of a casual now these days. Riot have always maintained this attitude that essentially gambling sponsorship is something that they never really wanted to integrate or allow into their esports broadcasting communities, and for good reason, really. I mean, if you do follow any other sort of mainstream sports, I'm a huge AFL follower here in Australia, NRL, obviously NBA, EPL, NFL. Sports gambling is rife and obnoxious all throughout these huge sporting organizations. Every second ad is trying to prompt you to, sign up to some app to get five-leg multis and basically just blow all your money. And I don't know what it's like in other countries, but gambling is a huge problem here. And me personally, I worked in 2 casinos in my hospitality days when I was a lot younger, and I saw a lot of the effects of problem gambling firsthand. So I'm pretty anti this sort of stuff, because as much as a lot of people can do it in moderation, there's plenty who can't. So I thought that the stance that Riot used to have in regards to sports gambling sponsorships was indeed a good one, and not just from a moral point of view, but just looking after people to not send them down the rabbit hole of online gambling, especially with such a younger audience compared to traditional sports, which probably tend to be a bit more older guys, in their mid to late 20s plus, and these are the guys who sort of probably engage more in online gambling. Esports tends to have a younger audience, and they are more susceptible to advertising and these sorts of things that might appear cool on the outside. So now we obviously know that the worm turned a little bit when League of Legends introduced the Hextech chess. I think it was in 2016, so 10 years ago now. Time flies. And obviously that introduced probably the first gambling mechanic into the game, and this is pretty common and rife throughout, especially Asian games at the time, with those kind of loot box mechanics. But of course, CS, Go and Counter-Strike was a huge proponent of that, and then it's just spread throughout the entire gaming industry. So to be honest, it is the next logical step was basically introducing sports betting into esports. Now, why are they doing it now? Obviously esports and League of Legends has been going on for about 15 plus years, I believe. So you would think that a big company that's basically backed by Tencent probably wouldn't need to do this, but they do need to use it as a revenue source. As we probably know, esports hasn't really been particularly profitable throughout the years. In fact, it's actually been losing money. And interestingly, reading through some of these articles relating to it, which I'll sort of cover off for you in a moment, Riot especially probably initially looked at using esports as an on-ramp for people to play League of Legends. But of course, if you've ever played League of Legends, you will know that a very different game to get into watching versus a playing. So over the journey, they've done other things through their, research of how to on-ramp new players by opening up streamers to be able to show some of these tournaments live on their streams without getting copy striked, or, for showing these tournaments. But of course, as we know, it's very expensive to produce these kind of events, and these teams that have been competing, I think there's over 100 plus teams sort of on average throughout the year, basically have all been losing money in sponsorship dollars, and those people have essentially had enough. So whilst Riot themselves aren't directly accepting gambling sponsorships, they've allowed their teams to do it. So there's a little bit of a timeline here that goes back about 3 years. So essentially, I'll just break it down for you so that you have a bit of an understanding of why Riot's doing this, and I'll give my thoughts at the end on what I really think about it. So to give you a bit of an idea, this was an article written by John Needham, who's the head of the esports side of League of Legends and Riot especially. And essentially, he wrote this article on this blog post in April of 2023, where he essentially laid out the vision for the future of esports at Riot Games. And to put it basically in a nutshell, he's basically talked about they want Riot Games to be the future of esports. Now, what does that mean for them? Well, they wanted to be essentially like real sports, so the NFL, the NBA, etc. But the problem here is that broadcast rights are a huge facet of revenue for these sports. You know, here in Australia, I think our AFL and NRL rights are, $2 or $3 billion over the journey, which is a lot of money for us here in Australia, but incomparable probably to what they pay for the NFL and NBA in the USA to be able to get exclusive broadcast rights to show the games. So obviously, without the broadcast rights, they need to find alternate sources of revenue because Twitch, YouTube, Twitch and YouTube at the time, essentially they're relying on advertising revenue, which just isn't even remotely close to supporting, running these events and supporting their teams, especially with so many people involved. So essentially, the traditional media bubble sort of popped for that, and the sponsorships weren't covering the bills, right? So that's why they've really pushed all these digital products that are related to Worlds. They always have with those skin lines and stuff, but they've really gone further in recent years to really jump on the hype train of these, mid-season invitational Worlds events to get players to open up their wallets because the sponsorship money just isn't cutting it anymore. Of course, that didn't stop them from essentially drowning in debt and losing more money. So they had to make a bit of a pivot in 2024. So where they've basically gone from that to adjusting their esports strategy. So essentially in March, they did a bit of an emergency bailout because a lot of their teams were going bankrupt. And if you didn't know, and to be honest, I hadn't paid too much attention to it myself. I like watching the Worlds, but that's about as far as it goes for me. Teams entering League of Legends were paying $10 million to compete, which is a hell of a lot of money, obviously. And so Riot essentially changed it to a revenue sharing split because their teams couldn't survive off the sponsorship dollars, basically. But yeah, $10 million for a franchise was good for Riot, but bad for the teams and bad for the players. They just couldn't stay afloat. So essentially, they paused those franchise fees. This is in 2024. And they accelerated payouts based on a revenue split for teams and Riot as well. And they created their central revenue pool as well. So this is funded by in-game cosmetic skins, essentially to keep all these teams on life support, because without teams, you don't have a league, and without league, you don't have esports. So that's basically where they sort of pivoted, but of course they were still losing money. So a year ago in June 2025, they've basically opened up sponsorships for teams for sports betting. So essentially, they realized that the skin sales weren't enough. They've opened up and made a bit of a concession to the teams who had been pushing for this sponsorship revenue for quite some time. So just it's important to bear that in mind. Obviously, they've been getting a lot of interest from online gambling, websites to basically push and promote their services, as you would expect, because these things are rife, not just only in esports, but obviously if you're ever into crypto or that sort of stuff, they are just literally everywhere through there, and they are not regulated. They usually have an office somewhere in Bolivia or Caracal or somewhere like that, and 99% of them are just pure scams, right? So, but they get a lot of money and they want to push their name out there and their brand. So essentially, Riot went with, okay, we're going to let you have tier one sponsorship. Tier one teams can have sponsorship opportunities in the Americas and certain other places. So essentially, they've had to pivot because they just realized that the revenue sharing wasn't working. Getting teams to pay $10 million just to enter the competition clearly wasn't working for the teams because everybody was going bankrupt. And as a business model, esports is probably always going to lose money. But losing money to the extent they were was just no longer feasible for Riot as a company to keep propping it up, because at the end of the day, they need to make money. So essentially, they probably wanted to take, the teams off the welfare check that they were doing and allow them to find alternate sources of revenue. So it's important to note here, and a lot of the wording that they've sort of gone around it was essentially saying that sports betting, and more specifically esports betting, is a space that more fans choose to engage with every year. And look, that is true. Like I said, it's becoming certainly a bit of a global phenomenon just in traditional sports, but esports is obviously a huge market as well because it's accessible to so many more people. And especially it's going to be less regulated because a lot of these sites are hosted in dodgy locations. If you want a sports bet account here or a points bet account in Australia, there's a lot of stuff you have to jump through to set up and prove your identity. But a lot of these places you don't too, especially if they're going to involve gambling, cryptocurrency on that as well, then it's just going to be a free for all for everyone. So essentially, Riot is basically saying, well, if we approach it and we vet people and we can control who they are because we're going to add these guardrails and we're going to check and vet everybody, all good. Okay, so that was, just remember, this is 1 year and 3 days ago, as it's the 29th of June, 2026, as I record this video. So a lot of corporate PR talk about vetting reputable agencies to protect the youth. And of course, like I said, they explicitly promise that Riot's official broadcast will stay 100% betting free. So in regards to teams wearing jerseys, they wear alternate ones to hide the logos on stream during games, but they can wear them outside of that, as I understand it. So that basically dropped the 10-year gambling ban that they had on gambling sponsors, but I guess the position came too untenable. So June 2026, which is just a few days ago, Riot proudly announces that they're expanding their global esports distribution with Kick. So Kick will now be part of their global roster of streaming platforms, giving players around the world more ways to watch, co-stream, and engage with our games and our esports. Kick is the primary platform for many passionate esports fans, especially in these regions. Bringing Kick into the mix of our global platform lineup helps us better serve those communities and brings more players together around the moments, matches, and creators that they care about most, which starts off with the mid-season invitational this year. Now, why is this a problem? Well, Kick is an Australian / Curacao based entity, and their parent company is Stake. Stake is an online gambling platform that essentially uses Kick as an on-ramp to get people involved in online gambling. I think from memory, they have a huge category where people just watch, basically people bet online and lose heaps of money. People find that quite interesting. If you saw the old Wall Street's bets pages back in the day, you'll know why people like what they call loss porn when people lose tons of money. It's quite enjoyable for some people, not myself though. I've seen it in the flesh and it's not something enjoyable. But essentially, they're ostensibly saying that Kick is opening up to, a broader audience, but we know that that's not true. We know that essentially Kick is getting on board and obviously letting the players or the teams advertise, more online gambling. And Kick is, if you don't know much about Kick, they have a 95/5 revenue split with their creators, which meaning 95% of revenue goes to the content creator and 5% only goes to Kick, which is untenable for any streaming business. So maybe going off a little bit off topic here, but online streaming services have to have massive amounts of infrastructure. So Twitch and Kick are the two largest in the world. Obviously, YouTube has their own, but it's a little bit different because YouTube doesn't really have the streaming culture that Twitch and Kick do. Twitch and Kick are both loss leaders for their parent companies. What does loss leader mean? It means neither of them turn a profit, but they solely exist to funnel people into their other products. Now, for Amazon, it's predominantly Amazon Prime. You sign up for Twitch Prime and you might watch Twitch, but you're also signed up to Amazon Prime. You get your free games that no one plays, once a month, and you're constantly signing up to Amazon Prime and they make money through that way. But as I said earlier, Kick, on the other hand, is owned by Stake. So they make their money through online gambling. Now, did a little bit of reading and research about the place. It is important to note that Kick obviously is a little bit different to Twitch in the way that it basically has its content rules. So Twitch does have a lot of rules around certain things, in regards to online gambling and, violence and nuisance streamers and stuff like that. Kick kind of proudly flaunts that they don't really adhere to these rules. So a lot of nuisance streamers on there, a lot of gambling content creators on there as well. It's a bit more Wild West of streaming, and the fact that they're owned by a gambling, an online sports gambling company just further exacerbates that issue. So when people go to view on Kick, they're most likely going to maybe not directly on the broadcast itself. Maybe Riot might still maintain some integrity in that regard, but you will go to the platform and you'll be bombarded and seeing all this online gambling promotion through their categories, through their advertising, etc. And we know that gambling companies do like to target youth and to make it, look cool and fun. You only have to look at your sports betting advertising, which is clearly directed to younger people, predominantly men. Because if you can get them as early as possible, you have a lifelong customer constantly giving you free money. So obviously, with a very young market that follows esports, in my opinion, this is not a very morally good decision by League of Legends. Now, I understand that they have a business to maintain, and obviously they want to give, potential, revenue opportunities to their teams, but where do you draw the line? Like, realistically, when you generally have a younger group of players, and then you're pretty much promoting a online gambling platform as a way of viewing them, they're going to get bombarded with ads. Even if a lot of them are over age, there's probably a lot of people that play the league these days who have played for quite some time. So I'm not saying these are all going to be kids like 15 or 14 years old, but there'll be a few. But they will be 18 to 24-year-olds, quite a lot of them, uni people. And then, as always, you think, I'll try it once or twice and see how we go. I won't get addicted. And before you know it, you get addicted. So I don't think this is a good move from Riot from a purely, I want to protect the players standpoint, because if they wanted to protect the players, they would not be associate themselves with a company like Kick at all, and maintain their stance on gambling sponsorships. But of course, if they wanted to protect the players, they wouldn't have introduced hextech chests and loot boxes to begin with. So it is a bit of a slippery slope to go down that regard. I can see this going further, and to the point where Riot themselves probably just starts accepting sponsorship dollars from gambling, online gambling outlets, just because it'll be a little bit too tempting, especially if your job as a CEO of esports relies on finally turning a profit. We only have to, like I said, I've used the example a few times, but you only have to look at how mainstream sports are affected by it. And for me, as a personal example, I love the AFL, the Australian Football League here in Australia, but the amount of sports betting is ridiculous. It's in every second ad when you're watching, a game. They go to an ad break. They've got major betting sponsors, major everything. The whole organization is just intertwined with gambling, to the point that it makes you feel like the whole thing's compromised every time you watch a game. So I really hope it doesn't come to that with Riot's games, but we've already seen the timeline for it in traditional sports, and in my opinion, it's only a matter of time before esports unfortunately falls under the same yoke of gambling, albeit online gambling with their potential sponsors going to be a hell of a lot less regulated than what we have with mainstream betting agencies. Anyway, just my thoughts on this whole Riot and Kick association. I'd love to hear what you think down in the comments, and I look forward to seeing the next video. And if you like these sorts of things, make sure you like and subscribe. Bye for now.